je propose qu'au sein du groupe, il y ait une petite solidarité qui s'installe et ceux qui, par exemple, ont une question mais ne se sentent pas forcément prêts de la poser en anglais peuvent demander à moi ou quelqu'un d'autre dans la salle de traduire pour lui ou elle. On pourra faire comme ça. Voilà, mais donc Paul Sochaki, qui est artiste, surtout peintre, mais pas que, on verra aujourd'hui, puis aussi éditeur et fondateur d'un journal de rue qui s'appelle Arts of the Working Class. Donc là j'ai l'avant-dernier exemplaire et vous avez entre vos mains le dernier exemplaire. Ça fait 3 ans que ce projet existe. Le titre d'ailleurs de la conférence de ce soir, qui avait été traduit en français, était le titre original de cette avant-dernière édition. Every heaven needs a hell to keep itself warm. Que tout ciel ou paradis aurait besoin d'un enfer pour se tenir au chaud. C'est aussi, vous verrez, il y a peut-être des ponts possibles entre à la fois le journal et qui présente volontiers des formules comme ça un petit peu métaphoriques et aussi la peinture de Paul Sochaki. Bon, ça pourrait être éventuellement une question qu'on lui posera. Il doit se demander qu'est-ce que je raconte là. Mais donc voilà, et Paul vit et travaille à Berlin. C'est d'ailleurs là où on s'est rencontrés. Et plutôt à l'occasion de ce journal, c'est comme ça que je l'ai connu. Et ensuite, j'ai pu découvrir son travail de peinture. Voilà. Sorry, Paul, I was a bit too long, and you were wondering maybe what I was telling about you and your work. But it was just a short presentation about your activity as a painter, and not only, and also founder of this street journal, Arts of the Working Class, and editor still. So I give you the word for a presentation, and do you want me to stay here, or should I sit with my colleagues in front of you?
I appreciate both loneliness and togetherness, so
okay.
The people can vote. Should Clara stay here or should she go? Who is for Clara staying? I think you have 50, to stay.
50.
Or?
Okay.
Well, thank you, Clara, for introducing me. I'm very happy to give you an example of a tragic artist figure being caught between the necessities and the big structures of cynical and unequal art world, and also the wishful dream of transcending together towards a more equal and more inclusive and more respectful environment. I guess this is something that stands for both art as a cultural expression of the world we live in, and at the same time art as something that communicates what we maybe wish for or comment where we live in. And I will try to give you a brief introduction into what I'm doing. And what I'm doing is actually different things, from publishing, painting, doing photography, film, and performances. So therefore I will focus on painting and publishing, especially the publishing project Arts of the Working Class, to have two very, let's say, antagonistic things. One thing very maybe personal and more emotional, the other one something like a correct collective work that is basically a company. And here you can see one of my paintings that I was departing from art school, one of my last paintings there. It's called Aesthetics and Ecology, and it shows the timeless power of the white cube and the museum, and this kind of power with its history of functions and history of roles and history of representation is well, so powerful that I guess beyond us being here and our actions being without even knowing or noticing it, so much influenced by the whole history of the system, it will still be there in 1,000 of years. But yeah, to give you short departure points, when studying art myself and being also kind of facing the very let's say labyrinth of role models and of traditions in the art, and the very obvious ambivalence between at some point the desire to fulfill some autonomous or very personal own contribution to something, and at the same time facing the limitations of what you actually can do and can be visible with. And contrary to Bayonne and Biarritz, I studied in Germany, in Hamburg, where you have a much more rigid art system. You have basically not just years, but you have classes that are under the supervision of one particular professor. This is very similar also in Poland, where I'm coming from, and a couple of other countries.
In France, it's still the case in Paris. It's the only school left with this old academic system or organization. Which is
very interesting dynamic, because it is of course like a segregation of students, and also it generates a identity kind of need to identify with something, and at the same time also there is like a so-called hierarchy, which one is potentially the better one or the worse one, and what gives you the best visibility or opportunity, and at the same time it also exposes you to basically the judgment of just one particular person that is maybe more important than your colleagues, your student peers. And yeah, therefore I'm it's a very positive surprise to be in this very open structure that we have here, where basically there is no or much less authority and much less kind of segregation. This painting is, by the way, is called Le Fantôme de la Liberté, or how would you say it? Yeah. And this one is called Tender Walls, to describe maybe the walls that you can experience while you navigate through the institution. And at the same time, when studying and facing at the same time the vast possibility of being able to do anything what you want to do, but when you look at art history and you see that artists generally are just famous for doing one thing, you also discover this kind of paradox, and the art is basically a kind of chain of paradoxes and of hidden power structures that surprise your own behavior. This painting is called Labyrinth of Truth, and while being a student myself, I was kind of looking for a good compromise to at some point be able to develop something outside the boundary, and at the same time also be able to find audience for it. And while experimenting, I kind of like figured out, I mean, that was already 15 years ago, that the art has a quite fast turnover of trends and of materials, and also is very fast in appropriating things from outside the art, and therefore, while experimenting, I started and also feeling powerless in the attempts to maybe also do something else. I started also more and more focusing on the most traditional medium you have, like painting. Because when doing performative things that maybe approach or include different environments from outside the arts, it becomes also much a gesture itself, and or when using particular materials or including different spaces at that time, where also the internet and the fluctuation of trends became so powerful, it seemed like these things or the material devaluates very easily the content. And while focusing on this medium painting, this helped me a lot to think actually more about the language aspect of painting, basically the catalogue of gestures and of symbols that you already have inside this medium, the possibilities of bringing very subjective, emotional things that not necessarily are read by other people the same. And it's at some point very important to note that, of course, everything is read completely different by any other person, because when going to exhibitions or museums, when you read a press release, it gives much the impression that meaning and interpretation is a standardized thing, and therefore I was quite catched by this idea, or by this process of actually trying to create through exhibitions and paintings a very maybe personal storyline of histories, of stories of relations between humans, and at the same time seeing like every one, of course, having a complete different story of it, and this kind of like normalization, that's or this kind of like, you can say, authoritarian mindset inside art structure. I will also talk more about that later when presenting the newspaper, because this is also has a lot to do with the breaking the idea of hegemonic opinion or narration of something. Here you can see the society happily functioning. This painting is called Das Kapital, or The Capital, like the book by Karl Marx, where you can see the human soulful capital being trapped somewhere in a structure that is refusing to release their ideas and actions. So across my practice, I tried to more and more depict in painting through this very mix of subjective and more historical references, try to make a dialogue between all these elements of hypocrisy and exclusion and fake dreams that you have in contemporary culture, but also in the in how history is told and how progress in society is projected through this narrative. And I said that I was only about to talk about painting and the newspaper, but I was lying. This is my brother Jesus and his friend Israel. It's a collaboration with a fashion designer from South Africa. We were visiting the most wealthy part of Johannesburg, where of course the property needs to be protected, and while shooting Jesus' new creations and looks, somehow the owner of this house drove into the image while we were using his house as a backdrop for the looks of Jesus and Israel. And this is other snapshots from South Africa. So here you have Israel again facing another wall. Here Jesus is eating the flora in front of a wall. Oh, and the Cultural Institute of Germany also is placed behind the high walls in this neighborhood. I haven't seen the Institut Français though. Probably it's also somewhere there. So yeah, back to symbolic hand gestures. This painting is called La Folie. Did I pronounce it right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's a little allegory and reminiscence to the moods of the beginning of colonialism, by the mood that maybe the conquistadores were shaken and departed to conquer new lands and divide the sky and set new borders upon it. And many of these paintings are kind of trying to retell the stories of division that I learn when traveling, when visiting different places. This painting is called Being Hungry is a Human Right. For those who are into painting techniques, here is a little close-up. Yeah. And this is an image of forced displacement of life. So while continuously enjoying the meditative and healing and joyful practice of painting, I was doing always side projects. Some of them became, for a particular time, also main projects. And the last one I'm also presenting you here is this newspaper, which was an attempt 4 years ago. We have very soon our anniversary of 4 years. It was an attempt to break the kind of especially economical loop inside the arts that you usually have only very few persons profiting economically from art praxis and from the general cultural field. And at that point, street newspapers were not a new thing, but the idea was to start an art magazine that gains through the medium of, through the notion of street newspapers, this kind of power to undermine the hierarchy of who earns the money. In our case, of course, the people who are in most cases homeless or drug addicts or in other ways struck by poverty earn the money. Of course, there is only like maybe 100 or 200 people who can directly profit from it. But it was important to start a project where the majority of the income would be not for the 1%, but for the very bottom part of the income of the basically privileged part of society. And it had also many other aspects, that through the medium of street newspaper we were able to not only reach audience that's like a bubble that is either reproduced by the high cost of a magazine and excludes an audience that cannot afford it, but also the bubble you would have online, because since social media and more and more algorithm-based flow of information, you have you get more and more the content that you kind of deserve. So therefore, through this very spontaneous distribution on the street, it's basically anyone who can buy it in a big city where it is sold. And at the same time, it is also multilingual, and in many places, also like on a global art level, there is the kind of push for English as a kind of lingua franca of the arts, and we try to also both give visibility and importance to different languages, and at the same time also show the feeling what it is to some people if you don't understand a particular content and you are kind of excluded, but in a positive way, because being excluded for someone who is always included is, I guess, a very beautiful experience that can, that can trigger on the other side ideas how to include others, for example. And so since 4 years we've been slowly developing this project and trying to both kind of having this more democratic and open medium that's available, allowing different kind of economy, but at the same time also exposing art to a different critical audience, because it is, especially for an audience that's not like a subscriber of like the most famous art magazine and basically is used to read the same thing again and again, is kind of more critical. And this kind of critical feedback hopefully also helps art institutions who are part of the magazine as advertisers and artists to see their practice from another perspective. This painting is called Soul Looking for a Body, and it's actually inspired by a book of a friend who wrote it about apricot tree in his garden that witnessed so many family disasters that it hardly can grow any fruits anymore. Oh, and this painting is called Body Temperature. This painting is called Auschwitz, like the German concentration camp in Poland. And it is about the unwillingness to, in the German discourse, to imagine Holocaust as something that technically happened and had a very material presence and realness. This painting is called Pont Neuf. And this is our publishing office in Berlin, where also people can pick up the paper in order to sell it on the streets. It's one of 6 pickup spots in Berlin, and there is also others in different cities. Here's some colleague selling, making business. And this is an edible painting. But it's also a portrait. This is a party in front of our office where all kind of people come over. We have also great neighbors. It's like an anti-fascist homeless support of volunteers who cook 3 times a week for homeless in Berlin, and we did like a picnic together. This painting, we've been speaking about homelessness. It's not necessarily about homelessness, but it's called En Passant, and En Passant it also explains how difficult it is actually for people who are excluded, homeless, or drug addicts to find back their way into having a home and having a life. And some people I know who finally got, after many years on the street, shelter again, like a not temporary but a permanent home. They were like, in this moment 90% of my sorrows disappeared, and I can actually finally start thinking about making art or whatever I want to do in my life. And this painting also shows how a hell can keep a heaven warm. And this one is called Soul of the Desert, and you can see what life in heaven is like. This one is called Democratic Autonomy. And maybe we can use this as a departure point for dialogue between the philosopher and the worker.
In that case, is that the autonomy of art, or just a general concept of what could be autonomy? Autonomy of thinking, being?
I guess both, but also it shows that beyond the simple explanation that autonomy is an illusion and blah blah, it's also a showcase that we are also, as artists or philosophers, drawn into a system of kind of being in the authority of a commission, basically. Like there's always, of course, a reference, but the more you professionalize yourself, the more there is an invisible hand that kind of commissions your work. And that's also why we have this effect, which I mentioned in the beginning, that usually when you look at famous artists, it seems like they have to do the same thing all and over.
Which is also contradictions we face all in the art school almost every day, because our pedagogy is based on the fact that our students have to learn to be more and more autonomous. Be autonomous, or it's really a core of pedagogy in art schools. But we know in the same time that after school, it's very difficult to find some good work conditions, and also produce freely your art or your forms. And as you said, there are some commissions of a kind of invisible hand organizing your productions. And this contradiction is very a real challenge for art schools, for students, for teachers, and for being an artist today. I don't know if you agree with what I'm saying, but it's indeed a question we can't avoid. It's constantly in the middle, and it's something we would like to keep in the middle, or at the core of the pedagogy, or our vision of artistic practice. But in the reality, it's always more complex, if not an illusion.
Yeah, and I guess the only solution to that is kind of taking certain things more into your own hand, and kind of deconstructing the structures of basically audience and kind of the commissioning power of institutions or galleries that of course have a particular clientele, that of course can sell certain things and certain things not, and museums that of course are much tied to certain trends and demands for a particular topic, a particular geography, a particular narration. And of course there is also academia. For example, there is paid PhDs or artistic researchers, and at some point they seem like quite open, and you can kind of fill in with your practice, but in the end, of course, everything is measured by certain academical scales that are kind of maybe speculative, but it's from this kind of experience, also as an artist, having to face, when I was finishing art, the general notion was 1% of artists are able to make an income from selling art. And then there is, of course, like paid research and this kind of thing that makes maybe another 1 or 2%. And I think it's if you already came to this field of arts where you kind of put so much personal and subjective idealism in it, where you kind of want to, at some point as an individual, but also inside the community, create a meaning, it's really important to question what framework will allow that and what framework will be able to sustain it economically, and what framework gives you like a long-term perspective to not get stuck somewhere. And
would you say that your paintings are in many cases a kind of answer or response to the situation of being an artist, or what does it mean exactly for for existential questions like freedom or autonomy or working conditions? What's the economic frame of being an artist, and what does it mean for watching around you? And would you agree with that? I'm just wondering because listen to your comments and then seeing all your pictures.
No, definitely, like especially my more early paintings were dealing more with the problems also inside the cultural sphere, and how cultural sphere also rather reproduces inequalities, reproduces hierarchies, and I guess after a while I was looking for a life and for also kind of reason outside the cultural field. That's why I turned more into basically political subjects, or subjects of identity politics, or subjects of general representation of kind of exclusion in society, and
just a simple question. I think I never asked you. Why all this, or why it's a kind of zoo? We had a kind of discussion already about that, but there are so many animals or figures. This whole collection depicts
I think
beings like drops, or yes. What would you say about that?
I mean, humans tend to measure everything by human scale, and have a very anthropomorphic approach to everything, no matter if it's animals or the physical world around them. And on top of this anthropomorphical approach comes the aspect, of course, of your class and your social hierarchy that you would also project as a human. Therefore, a cop is a pig, and business asshole is a shark, and so there is always this kind of this anthropomorphic umbrella with all its class divisions and class references.
And then also maybe a last question before, or is there a question in the audience? I check the time now. Does someone have a question? Yeah? How is life in Berlin as an artist?
I think it's really shit. The year I arrived in Berlin, actually, that was also straight away the year when I had the idea for the newspaper. Because in general, the situation in the city, like the precarity, the homelessness, and it was getting worse and worse. And it seemed like art doesn't really make sense in this place anymore, because it's so commodified, but commodified in a very regressive way. But I don't want to disencourage anyone to move there. I mean, because if you move and don't like it, you can leave again. Or which direction is your question? More like this one? Did this answer your question, or?
C'est la merde à Berlin, comme artiste. La ville a été tellement gentrifiée que il ne reste plus grand-chose de ce qu'on a, de cette idée qui a été colportée, qui a été réelle à un moment donné, que c'était un endroit où on pouvait, avec peu d'argent, vivre bien et être face à plein de possibles pour sa vie. Et ne pas justement ne pas être coincé dans une nécessité économique de gagner suffisamment d'argent pour juste dormir, manger, se laver. Mais c'est plus le cas, c'est de moins en moins le cas, et c'est pour ça, par exemple, qu'ils ont fondé ce journal il y a 4 ans. Enfin, il y a une connexion entre cette gentrification, l'explosion des sans-abri dans la ville, et une précarisation générale des gens qui travaillent dans le monde de l'art, qui est aussi c'est une part très importante des gens qui vivent à Berlin encore aujourd'hui. Sorry for the little translation.
Yeah.
And interpretation maybe a bit too, but
the interesting thing inside the art that this situation of Berlin with its precarity brought was that about 10 years ago you had a very strong notion of the artist again, of being so victimized, and there was already this kind of self-precarization. That's, even though of course there was many other actors in the city that have a much more tough life, the last 10 or 15 years the artist became like the sad oracle of the city that is carrying the misery of the kind of social inequality that is more and more dividing the city.
yes. Est-ce que vous savez ce que ça veut dire la gentrification rapidement, comment le système se passe ou... Non. C'est, disons, une évolution économique d'un lieu qui est d'abord prisé justement par des gens qui n'ont pas trop d'argent et qui cherchent des possibles et de vivre autrement que de travailler beaucoup pour se payer un petit peu, et qui sont souvent des zones un peu déshéritées, soit pour des raisons industrielles ou politiques, et qui petit à petit, créant ce mouvement, qui sont souvent des artistes, ce qu'on appelle en anglais les créatifs, va participer de faire monter la valeur des lieux, et notamment immobilière. Et donc petit à petit, ces lieux gagnant de la valeur vont devenir à nouveau intéressants et vont attirer à nouveau aussi des gens de plus en plus bourgeois et de plus en plus riches. Et donc le quartier exemplaire de ça, c'est Soho à New York, qui par exemple, a été un thème central dans le groupe Fluxus. Donc vous pouvez un petit peu regarder. Bon, la gentrification, c'est aussi une petite boussole pour circuler dans l'histoire de l'art qui n'est pas inintéressante. Et Berlin, on est à un moment là où, effectivement, c'est très très cher d'habiter à Berlin aujourd'hui. Quasiment aussi cher qu'à Paris. Voilà. Ça a augmenté de 70% en 10-15 ans.
Je pense qu'en français, ce sera mieux. En français, est-ce que tu pourras
T'es
traduire?
sûre, mais non, tu parles très bien anglais, je te jure, Cassel.
Non.
T'as posé des questions à Pauline Curnet-Jardin, je m'en souviens.
Oui, mais non, là, non. Du coup, non, je me demandais les lieux qui sont, du coup, à l'origine, du coup, artistiques et plutôt pauvres, et qui ensuite deviennent réappropriés un peu par des personnes plus riches,
Oui.
et du coup, qui augmentent dans le prix. Est-ce qu'il n'y a pas, du coup, juste un phénomène de déplacement des lieux et d'autres qui émergent au moment où ça devient trop riche pour un endroit? Enfin,
Si, forcément, il y a un.
oui, mais
il y a
du
un
coup, est-ce que
roulement,
ça
il y
se
a-
complète pas? Enfin, les personnes qui sont trop pauvres maintenant pour Berlin peuvent aller à un autre endroit pour le faire remonter dans le domaine de l'art et tout ça. Et du coup, créer un mouvement un peu perpétuel de ville en ville et du coup être positif d'une certaine manière. Je sais pas si c'est clair.
Ouais. Non, mais je crois que c'est un peu le projet du journal. Facing this brutal gentrification in Berlin, is there really no places left, even maybe at the border of the cities or around, which are still interesting and open and made for outsiders from an economic perspective?
The competition with startups and companies, since the city is becoming more and more finally economically successful, is too big on the property market. Therefore, also the outskirts are already very expensive. But the funny thing is, for example, artists are not the most affected by it. There is, since art is so pretty, there's always some funding and political will to support art. For example, I'm part of 2 floors of art studios that are also subsidized by the city. In a big building where on 2 other floors is actually migrant workers living. It's a migrant worker hotel. And to just give you numbers, for example, the artists pay maybe 150, 200 euro for their studio. And the migrant workers have to pay maybe 150 euro only for a bed in a room that they share with 2-3 other people. So of course the migrant worker who has a shit job does not get subsidized. And I guess this is a common thing also in Paris or in London, where you also have a big economy of slave labor as well. And artists are definitely not in a comfortable position because
Value maker.
the system is so much depending on having the high and low. But there is many other fields where you have only the low, and the low is even lower.
It's a bit depressing, your description, but how to escape this contradiction of being an artist?
Yeah, for example, making a street newspaper that supports those people who are definitely less privileged than artists, and inspire with this project also other artists to do a solidary practice that maybe helps other people on other in other kind of aspects. And I think there is many ways and many possibilities to build together structures that can make cities better, can make can dismantle divisions. But of course you can also just do some fancy thing. And I mean, I also know people who made a lot of money with art, and they were able to like support not only their whole family but half of their village with that money, like who are from East Europe or from Africa, and with this, or India, and with the big income they did in like West European or American art market, they kind of made a nice investment in their community. But that's still a very unlikely situation, and but you never know what expects you. In art, in general in the world, you never know what comes tomorrow, but in the arts, it's triple surprise.
She's asking why you're painting on canvas and not paper.
I do paint also on paper, but not that much.
Yeah, to her, she's kind of surprised of those your critique through your paintings and metaphors and images regarding the art world or the world, and the critique of hierarchies. But in the same time, you choose this historical object of having a frame, and then you put your canvas on it, and it's a specific grammar of painting, and it gives a special status, and it's very affirmative. She says it's not really a critic, but she was, because intuitively she would have think on a paper it's lighter, it's easier to roll, or to it has a different physical appearance and meaning.
Yeah, actually, canvas can also be really light. Sometimes canvas is even lighter than paper. And you can use different fabrics. I mean, on photography you don't see it that much, but you can have very thin see-through fabric or different colors and textures. I mean, same with paper as well. But I also mentioned in the beginning that kind of deconstructing this kind of frame of art stopped making to me much sense when I was studying, because it is so much part of the art, like dismantling the frame, the border, and kind of appropriate everything that's outside, and or do nothing. I mean, we had art that was nothing, we had art that appropriated whatever, and therefore I kind of like tried to turn with this practice more inward, but at the same time much in respect of the outside world, and in reference of the outside world. Yeah, and by the way, if you like, you can leave me some signature or message. I'm very happy to read it later.
So my question was, it was about the South African artists you've met.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you how you made connections with these artists as you live in Berlin, and you're Polish, right?
Yeah.
like how you've made connections with this artist, like how it happens. Is there like an art structure in Berlin that is like providing connections for different like artists all around the world? I don't know. Like, you understand my question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, basically, I moved in 1990 with my family from Poland to Germany, as they were basically also like migrant workers there. And after growing a bit older, I kind of hated Europe and what it represents as a place of arrogance, as a place of racism and all the other kind of that comes along with it. And therefore I was a very happy traveler and liked to visit different places outside Europe and basically hang out with the people, learn their way and do stuff with them together. And so I was doing a little trip to South Africa and met a lot of people basically on the street. And
so like the people that are in your issue, you know them. Like, for example, here I'm seeing Adama Paris. She's from Senegal. I think she's like a fashion
she's from
designer.
Dakar. Yeah,
So you know her or something?
I don't know her.
Okay.
But the magazine is also, I mean, there is a lot of people who contribute. There is also sometimes external editors. And this interview is actually also in French inside this. Like a old friend of mine did this interview, who's a fashion designer.
But it's a bit paradoxical because the name of this journal is Arts of the Working Class. Like, I don't think these people are from the working. Like, they are not from the working class. I mean, they are kind of wealthy. They are artists, like famous artists. So,
yeah.
in which way?
I mean, you have also, of course, inside the newspaper, people who are from the working class or people who are maybe homeless. There's also interviews with. But of course, this is also a bit what it is about, because you have inside the arts always the kind of self-fetishization of something that's maybe not privileged, because it's very easy inside the arts to feel not privileged because there's always someone much more privileged than you, but somehow you had the possibility to enter this system. Of course, many people are less likely than others. And at the same time, art is a place where there is a kind of mystification of work and of labor. Like, I mean, you call artworks work of art. And that's why it's also kind of a mock on the arts as a working class, because they have a lot of artworks.
I understand. Okay.
And but of course, with this, the paper kind of doesn't raise this question that much symbolically, but more practically, because there is people who are actually on the lowest social ladder in society, who basically are homeless, and it's meant to help them make an income. And the idea was to make something that's attractive, and the main goal is still that, I mean, I care less that maybe everything is perfect inside the paper. I care more that there is enough copies printed and a lot of people can make money with it, and there is people who can make substantial income with that. There's people who make, like in general, if you are not psychically too unstable, you can maybe make in Berlin between 20 and 35 euro in an hour with selling newspaper. So this is, of course, like a good support for many people. But one should not underestimate the costs that people have when they live on the street, because living on the streets is equally expensive as living a fancy life, because you don't have a fridge, you have to buy everything fresh, you can't wash your clothes, you need a lot of money. That's why we were also one of the first street magazines that give the copies for free to people, and we are funding it through the advertising of art institutions. Because at this point, they can make themselves useful to art institutions, and also they have the benefit that through the street distribution they reach also different audiences, and not just the art elite. So there is small little progresses in many ways. But of course, this is not a revolution. And of course, selling newspaper on the street is a shit job. I mean, some people like it, but still, it's a hard work. It's not like like someone imagines to do in his future when he's as a kid and one becomes grown up, want to be a street vendor.
Okay.
And are you working alone when you paint? Or yes?
Unfortunately, yes, but sometimes friends come over and we get drunk, and then maybe I also don't paint. But I don't mind if it's alone or together. I mean, there is the beautiful part of stretching the canvas and doing the priming. It's so beautiful. I get always very excited when I do it, and that takes maybe 1 or 2 hours. With a big one like this, maybe 2. And the painting part, I don't know, maybe 1 hour and then another hour in this one. But there's also some that's like a month. Sometimes. But sometimes I do a sketch on canvas.
Yeah, I have a more specific question, but can you re-explain the meaning of the painting with the angel who's pooping on the plate of the person who's under? And because I had a question, but I don't know if it's right to... Yes. What is the meaning? Because you talk a lot about the hierarchization of social classes. And what is it like?
In this painting, it's inspired by a myth of some evil, maybe foreign or far away entity that's kind of threatening your kind of values or your privilege. I mean, you wouldn't call it privileged, but you can maybe imagine the little Emmanuel Macron sitting there and reading maybe what is Emmanuel Macron's favorite book?
I don't know.
I don't know. I think probably what's his name? Jean-Luc Godard would probably say Mein Kampf.
But why represent it with an angel if it's bad and like a demon or something? That's the thing I didn't understand. Why represent it like an angel
I mean,
if it's bad?
angels and devils, of course, they don't exist, but
Yes.
there is a certain idea that a cultural narrative or a political narrative is the just one, and the other one is not just. And in this case, it's also a little reference to basically the invisible misery that is kind of fueled by a hegemonical kind of first world, high GDP, developed country, society, and their kind of imagination that's somewhere far away. Things are a bit shit. You wouldn't go there, but they're okay. And this is basically the heaven that is among us also here.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, sister.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Okay. So my question was about a painting you've made, and it's you know, the painting when there is like in the middle of the canvas there is like a weird figure. It seems like a creature, like a horse creature. My question was, do you get inspired by myth a lot? Because I don't know, like this painting made me think about the Trojan horse. You know, the Greek Trojan horse, and because like the figure occupy like a central position in the space of the canvas. So that was my question. Do you know what I'm talking about? Okay. So. I don't know. When I saw this painting, I was like, maybe the fire just like symbolizes the, you know, the genius of, I don't know, like the genius, like the fire. Like
Yeah. Yeah, it was part of an exhibition together also with the painting that looks like an anthropomorphic shipwreck, where there was basically the kind of invisible movement, displacement, and also labor of kind of the workers that are usually not part of the society because they don't, like historically and contemporary, they are for many reasons not part of society because of passport or whatever. And it was part of an exhibition where there was basically the unescapable ground, which is where this kind of ship was passing through, or this little horse is walking along. And there was also imaginary heaven that's completely detached part of the exhibition, but this kind of worker was planting a seed that maybe would reach one day the sky when he dies. It's called Fire Department, or I think...
Non, les pompiers.
Yeah,
c'est en
les
français, les pompiers.
Yeah. The size is like small, like that size. Like 80 per 60 something. Almost everything was oil. And here you have like a transparent layer mixed in with a little bit of white.
So
Yeah, when I look at painting, it's really a great thing to do. I love it. But unfortunately, the newspaper is so much work that I only get like maximum 1 hour in the studio a week.
I think we're finished, maybe.
I hope I have nice signatures in the book.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank
And
you
thank you to
for
the audience.
coming.
Have a nice evening.
Sorry for my bad English.